Hi everyone, my name is Ashiria, and today I'm going to be talking with Dr. Mort Jorgensen, who played a role as a doctor in the Apollo 8 and 11 missions. Dr. Jorgensen is now a docent at the San Diego Air and Space Museum, and today he will be sharing some of his amazing experiences with me.
You're on.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I'm really excited.
Well, it's a pleasure.
So I guess I'll just start off with my first question. I know one of the most exciting things about talking with you before for me was how you were involved in Apollo 8 and 11. So could you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. At the time I was a surgeon in the Navy, and I was working at the Navy Hospital in San Diego, which is already referred to as Balboa. And my boss, the chief of surgery, called and he says, "You be at Cape Kennedy next Thursday morning at 0800." To which I answered, "Yes, sir." And got an airplane ride, went all the way over there, and it was a briefing. And everybody who was going to be in support from a medical standpoint was there in that group. Uh, I was a surgeon because they wanted to have a surgeon on board in case they got hurt. Um, so we were briefed on Apollo 8, and I picked up an anesthesiologist who happened to be an Army anesthesiologist and a surgical tech who was with the Air Force. He was an enlisted man in the Air Force. So 2 weeks later, the three of us met in Pearl Harbor, and we got aboard the USS Yorktown, which was the recovery carrier for Apollo 8. And we set out to sea, and for 5 days after they blasted off from the Cape, which went smoothly, we just made a great big box in the ocean. And then Christmas Eve, they were orbiting the moon, and they recited from Genesis in the beginning, and that's where they were. They were the beginning of a whole new adventure going around the moon. So they went around. They didn't land, and then they headed back. And as they returned, as they were returning, we got everything ready for them to be recovered. So they made a bullseye landing as far as coming back right over the ship, and the wind drifted them off to the side. They landed in the water. Nobody got hurt. As far as the medical people, from our standpoint, the surgical recovery, we were just tourists. The NASA people, of course, they had a internist with them, and he listened to their heart and listened to their lungs and checked their blood pressure. They checked X-rays of the bones and see if there had been any calcium loss out of the bones, and of course did a chest X-ray. But then they were done, and we got to talk to them. Frank Borman was sitting on a stool in the NASA. They called them the flight surgeon. He asked me if I would help get Frank out of his flight suit. So I said, "Commander, do you need some help getting out of that rig?" And he said, "Yeah, I stink." So I helped get him out, and he gave me a little packet of breakfast cereal cubes, which I put in my pocket, and he kept it for himself. A copy of a Norman, I think they call it. It's not a Bible; it's a tract or something like that. He kept that for himself. These cereal cubes made it to about 5 PTA meetings and schools and things like that. Then the plastic seal broke open. It turned to nothing, so I threw it out. So that was Apollo 8. Apollo 11 was 7 months later. Uh, and that was Neil Armstrong's thing. We again went for the briefing, which was just exactly the same thing. And this time we got on board the Hornet, and blast off went perfectly smooth. They made the moon landing. You know how Neil Armstrong had a little bit of trouble with negotiating the actual landing itself, but he is an experienced airman. He took care of it quite well. And then they got back aboard and returned home. This time when they landed, of course, everybody was afraid they might have moon germs, moon bugs of some sort on it. They didn't know about radiation, so everything was they were isolated and in an Airstream trailer. I got to go through the trailer before we went to sea, and they had just about everything you could want in there, including food, or not food, but appurtenances for 21 days, which is how long they had to stay in. They could put stuff aboard, but they couldn't take it off. Food stuff went into like an airlock and into a special conveyor, so the empty dishes and stuff didn't pile up on them. We couldn't talk to them, so it was disappointment in that regard. But it was just so exciting to be there. It was actually watching history being made. NASA was nice, and you saw the coin that NASA sent me. I brought it. Want me to just show it?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. See if I can find it. Must be in this pocket. Oh, well, maybe I didn't bring it up. There it is. This was a nice little token. I don't know if you can see it very well there. Got the 3 astronauts on the front, and it says Apollo 8. And it gave the date. And on the back side, it says, in appreciation for your contribution to the Apollo Saturn project, the Apollo 8 crew carried medal in this medallion around the moon in the first flight to the moon. So it's a treasured item. I take it with me to the museum where I act as a note and show it to people who have any kind of interest. And young kids, they just are amazed by it. So it's kind of a fun prop, but I treasure it myself. That's about all I can say about Apollo 8. I didn't catch any moon bugs or anything like that.
That's so cool, because when you were talking about that, I was thinking about how like the isolating the astronauts is kind of like a quarantine almost that we had during COVID-19. So
that's right.
Similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also really great that you have that little token that you can show people and like for appreciation for all the work that you did on those historic events, because that's something that I know a lot of kids like me really look up to.
Thank you.
So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about how you kind of got interested in this field and how what you did as a child that made you want to follow this kind of career path.
Well, it all starts back when I decided I wanted to be a doctor. And I started that as a little kid, but it wasn't just a spoof. I stayed with it and stayed with it. I knew by the time I was in high school, that's what I was going to do. So I made a point of taking not only biology, I took physiology, and I certainly took chemistry in high school, as well as all the other things. Good grades is what they wanted. They wanted you to be well-rounded. And then when I went to college, I majored in, I got a degree in chemistry. They did not have a pre-med situation at San Diego State. And the pre-meds as such, which we declared, either took chemistry major and a zoology minor or the reverse. Well, I didn't want to be a zoology major, run around with a butterfly in my career, So I took the chemistry and got my BA in chemistry. Actually, went to work in Convair 2 of the summers right after graduation, where I was substituting for the people going on vacation. So it was a practical application of the chemistry that I learned. Of course, then I went on to med school at UCLA, and the chemistry that they taught there was all repetition for me. That included biological chemistry, and that was basically was it. Organic, of course, was organic chemistry, and that's everywhere. So from there, I decided at one point to join the Navy because I didn't have a whole lot of money, and school was not as expensive as it is now, but it was expensive enough then. So the money I made as an active reserve was enough to make me one of the richest kids in med school. But that also, I became interested in the internship program with the Navy, which I took. And then I went to sea for a year, and then I went to Bethesda, where I got my surgical training. Then I came back to Vietnam for a year, and then back to Balboa, and then they caught up with me and said, "You're going out for Apollo 8." That's how it all evolved.
So did you always have kind of an interest in space, or were you more looking to kind of
Well,
be a
the
doctor?
space, I kind of just tumbled into that. Uh, like anybody else, I was interested in it. I watched all the early blast offs from, the monkeys and all that. And of course, it just it was a sort of fascinating thing. But then suddenly space came at my footsteps or my back door. And I said, heck, here I am.
So is there anything that you feel like you would change about your career, or do you feel like it's exactly how you wanted it to be?
Well, I can't complain. Uh, Somebody said, well, what, you wasted a year in Vietnam. No, I didn't. I did lots of surgery out there. It was a learning experience, What we accomplished with Vietnam, it's a matter of conjecture, but um, no, the school was wonderful. Early training for schools was wonderful. The surgical program of Bethesda, I couldn't have asked for more. And I've got a new wife of 35 years. She had 2 kids and I had 3. And so between us, we have 5 kids. I wouldn't change that either.
That's wonderful.
Don't even try to count the grandchildren.
Do you have any advice or suggestions for kids like me who are interested in aerospace and want to go into science?
Well, specifically if you're interested in aerospace, um, Embry-Riddle School, I understand, is supposed to be very, very good for that program. And I know that your counselors at school could tell you which other schools are along that line. But I sit on the scholarship committee at the museum, and it seems like half of the kids there are applying to Embry-Riddle, along with a lot of other schools. So that's the one I hear the most about. But San Diego State, right here in our own town, can you believe they got a supersonic wind tunnel there on campus?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, and a regular wind tunnel too. The director of our wind tunnel, which is down at the airport, he and I went out there one day, got a nice tour, and had a lunch with their director, and it was time well worth spending.
Awesome. Do you want to talk a little bit about your work at the museum and
Well,
how?
the museum has been a wonderful thing to do. I did it when I retired from the practice of surgery. After I retired from the Navy, I went into private practice and was doing vascular surgery and general surgery here in San Diego. But as I got time marches on, you get older and older, and an aortic aneurysm in the middle of the night begins to hurt your back. So the time came I retired. But one of my best friends, he was a veteran aviator. He flew Wildcats in Guadalcanal, and he flew Panther jets in Korea. Can you believe that?
Wow.
We moved from propeller driven to jet driven. So he said, I got the job for you. And he brought me down to the museum and walked me around. And he says, okay, what day you want to work? But I had been to the museum long before my father took me there, back about 1965, I think it was. He had a propeller that he gave to the museum, and he wanted to see it on display. It burned down in '78, unfortunately.
Oh
So
no.
we lost that. So I enjoy being there. I talk to people. Uh, they don't all want to know where the bathroom is. So I sort of work the area by World War One, and we have a vintage aircraft there that a replica of a vintage aircraft. But the original was flown here in San Diego in 1911 and demonstrated for the Navy. And the Navy said, we are going to have naval aviation. And it was based upon our airplane. So 100 years later, they took it down and put it in San Diego Bay and flew it. It's a seaplane. So that's a historic moment, you know. We see this sort of thing all the time. Of course, I've met a lot of the astronauts. They come from various occasions and things like that. Uh, we have a wall of honor where people come in, and half a dozen or so are brought in every year, and you meet some very important people. My wife was very tickled to meet who's this guy that played Indiana Jones. I forget, but she got her picture taken with him, and she was volunteering down at the zoo, and she took the
Oh,
picture down there and mounted it at the zoo.
oh wow.
So yeah, there's fun meeting nice people. I met Mickey Rooney down there. Mickey Rooney came in with his wife
Oh,
Jan, and it was sort of a dress night. And my wife Noni came as the gal from My Fair Lady with the big hat and the white blouse and the black skirt. My sister came as Cruella Van Pelt with her cigarette, and I was just a, a dragoon or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, so here comes Mickey Rooney, and his wife said, "Take our picture with you guys." And so we had a nice photograph. And she said she handed me her business card and said, "Please send me a copy of it because it was taken with a camera, you know, a cell phone." And it had her full name and address on it. And you just don't hear of that from people in Hollywood. It just doesn't happen. So I sent it to her, and she sent back the nicest letter you could ever expect to receive for sending a photograph someplace. So these are the kind of experiences, aside from just yakking about an airplane, that you get to enjoy there. You meet so many people, and the people you work with are wonderful. They are. Most of them are ex-aviators. They can't hear very well, you know, their ears are going to pot,
yep.
but they have earbuds in. But if you're not looking straight them in the face, they don't know what you're saying. So it's a lot of fun. I started out working 3 days a week as volunteer, but then after I hurt my back, I only work one now. So that's the life of a volunteer. They want you for collateral duties. So they say I did the audit. I do the audit committee. I serve on the board, and I was on the scholarship committee.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this and being very, very inspiring. And this is because I want to go into aerospace. This is really kind of a role model situation for me.
Well, I'm not the role model necessarily, but you know, you asked about some of the earlier stuff. My dad was a pilot. My dad was an immigrant from Denmark, and the first thing he did was get into the aircraft industry in Chicago. And he learned how to fly, and he gave me a ride in a Piper Cub when I was 6 years old.
Wow.
But then the war started, and we came out to California, and it wasn't until after the war was over that he was able to do any flying because we were all grounded here. So he bought a Fairchild PT-19, two-seater open cockpit airplane. And I was big enough by then where I could start the engine by turning the crank that was in the side of the engine. So he was happy to have me do that because nobody else had the time, you know. So I flew with Dad a lot in the PT-19. That's where I learned how to fly an airplane. I never learned how to land it or take it off, but he went into more modern airplanes after that. And then when I was in private practice, and I flew a lot in the Navy, when I was in private practice, one of my partners had a nice airplane, a beautiful airplane, and he liked to fly and he liked to ski. So we flew up to Mammoth a couple of times doing that. Most of the time I was flying the airplane. He was tinkering with instruments. So it was a fun lifestyle, but I never owned an airplane, and I never logged an official hour.
That's still very cool. You do know how to fly a plane. That's something not many
Yeah, I
people
could,
can claim.
matter of fact, I even avoided a midair collision over San
Oh,
Bernardino. We were flying with air traffic control telling you what to do, you know, and all of a sudden they called our call sign, which was 381 Zulu, and Ben is playing with his avionics, the guy on the earphone said 381 Zulu, make an immediate right turn, to which I did that. That's right on over here. And here comes this passenger plane descending, and it went right behind where we had been. And you could hear it whistle like that. So that's the only time I had any kind of a, less than desirable experience flying, but I was able to handle it. Now, one thing I don't think I told you before, the meaning of docent, which is basically the same as doctor, it's the same word, it means teacher. But our museum, it means we docent get paid.
That's so funny.
What else can I help you with?
Yeah, those were the questions that I mainly wanted to ask. Again, I was like really interested when I met you the first time and you were talking about Apollo 8 and 11 and the coin especially.
Well, it's been a wonderful thing in my senior years. They're very accommodating. I have a powered chair there that I can use when I'm working. I have one here at home too. But I can drive my car. I have no problem with that. It's just standing up and walking that gives me trouble. But as I say, the museum is very accommodating. It could be a nice bunch to work for. You see our CEO on television a lot. Whenever something's happened of avionic necessity, he's there. We also, our chairman of the board is Mark Larson, who does a lot of the news, and he has a radio show as well. And they're nice guys. I had a birthday party there last year for about 5 years ago for my 85th birthday. And Jim and Mark did a dog and pony show with me as a person suffering. But everybody had a good time.
That's so cool. Yeah. I know when I was in the education center, they were talking about how they have a lot of birthday parties there too for kids.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, we have an excellent education department. I don't know the new director, but I know Roscoe Davis. Ross was a helicopter pilot, and he actually flew some of the recovery helicopters for the Apollo program. So ones you see in the television program, landing on the carrier or picking up the astronauts. Roscoe was in a lot of them. And we have another guy who works there in the museum, Gordo. We call him, his name is Gordon, but we call him Gordo because that's what one of the astronauts called him when he was working with them. He's a diver. He jumps out of helicopters and into the water and dives around and does good things like that. They're wonderful people that you meet down there because we've got retired airline pilots and just plain retired aviators, but and sometimes they're just retired folks who just love aviation. That's what it is.
Yep, that's what I had a wonderful time meeting everyone there, especially you, and just
Well,
getting to see.
you're welcome anytime,
Thank you. Yep, so I don't really have any more questions.
Well, I guess we're done then.
Yep,
Clouds
thank
are
you so
starting to
much
clear.
for.
I can look out the window. We have a nice view of the bay, and the sky, of course, is cloudy in the morning. I'll always hear San Diego Bay gray, but it's clearing up now, so it'll be another nice day. So get out there and enjoy it, and then come back to the museum lots of times. Okay.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Okay,
I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, and good day. Bye. Live long and prosper. Star Trek was instrumental too.